Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Camilla Benbow, and I'm Dean of Peabody College. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Homecoming and Reunion 2023. It is so wonderful to see so many Vanderbilt alumni return to take part of this weekend's activity. And if you're over on the Peabody College side, you'll see lots of tents just waiting for you to have a wonderful time and to celebrate. But at Peabody this year, we've had something that is truly phenomenal to celebrate. In September, we announced a landmark gift from Hal and Marjorie Roberts to establish the Roberts Academy and Dyslexia Center here at Vanderbilt University. Their transformational gift will make possible a new school on the Vanderbilt campus dedicated to educating elementary-age children with or at risk for dyslexia. This is a passionate cause for the Robertses, who have been moved by having experienced the challenges of dyslexia in members of their family. And I will just say, I have been challenged by it too in our family. Several of my kids had dyslexia, so I know the importance of this gift personally. But the Roberts Academy and Dyslexia Center is a momentous investment on their part to improve the lives and learning of children with dyslexia and their families. Their gift to Vanderbilt is unique in not only funding a school, but in providing support for a new research center dedicated to understanding and ameliorating the condition. Peabody and Vanderbilt already have faculty who are renowned for research in this area, and the Roberts' gift will take that work to new heights. Our panel this afternoon will explore this potential in greater detail. I would also encourage you to scan the QR code on the handout you were given to visit the Academy and Center site and learn more about the gift and plans for the future. You can sign up there to receive updates. Now, our moderator this afternoon is Professor Joseph Webby, who is the chair of Peabody's Department of Special Education. Professor Webby's personal research is in the area of children's behavior disorders. He earned his master's and doctorate degree from the best university ever, Vanderbilt University, and he has taught here since 1990. Joe will introduce our panelists who will discuss our research on and the future of dyslexia. I would note that this event is also being live streamed, and afterwards will be able to be viewed on the Roberts Academy website. If you have any questions, we will stick around after today's presentation. Please welcome Joe Webby.
Thank you, Dean Benbow. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to make a few remarks about the Department of Special Education here at Vanderbilt University. I am the chair. I'm also a big fan. I can say without subjectivity that we're the best Department of Special Education in the nation and probably the best Department of Special Education in the world. And this is one of the reasons that I think the Roberts chose Vanderbilt for this academy and center. And the faculty in my department across a number of disability conditions are at the top of their game. And the three panelists we have here represent that expertise and that excellence in the field of dyslexia, reading disabilities, and other learning disabilities as well too. So I just want to say that as department chair, it's a pleasure every day to work with these individuals. Camilla has mentioned I've been here since 1990, and I still get excited coming to work because of the new information, the new knowledge, and the exciting innovations that are being done in the field of learning and behavior and disability, and it's exciting, and I'm very excited about our panelists here. So if you panelists will come up, first I'd like to introduce Dr. Lynn Fuchs. You come up here. Dr. Lynn Fuchs is Professor Emerita and Research Professor in Special Education and is a Fellow at the American Institute for Research. She has received numerous awards for her work in the field of learning disabilities, math disabilities, and reading. She is probably one of the most cited researchers in social sciences. In 2021, she received the Harold W. McGraw Prize in Education, which is designed to celebrate innovation, inspiration, and impact in education by recognizing outstanding leaders who have devoted their careers as closing gaps and accelerating educational opportunity for all students. Dr. Doug Fuchs, Professor Emeritus and Research Professor of Special Education, is also a fellow at the American Institute of Research, and he's also run numerous awards and distinctions for his work in the area of reading and learning disabilities. Dr. Doug Fuchs was also co-recipient of the McGraw Prize, and in 2022, he was appointed to the National Board of Education Sciences by President Biden. And our last panelist is Dr. Lori Cutting. Dr. Cutting is a Patricia and Rhodes Hart Professor of Special Education. She's the Associate Director of the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. Like these other two, she's won numerous recognitions for her work in the area of dyslexia, neuropsychology of learning, cognition, and is just super impressive in what she knows about sort of the underpinnings of how children learn and learn reading and where some of those bypasses to successful reading may occur as well too. And recently she was appointed as Associate Provost in the Office of Vice Provost for Research and Innovation. So welcome, panelists. So I think I'll just stand. I can move down here. There we go. Okay, so we've come up with some questions to share with the panelists, and we're just going to do this in a round robin sort of fashion and sort of give you a little sort of bit of history of where they are, how they got to this place in their careers, a little bit about what some things they're currently working on and what they might see for the future in the field of dyslexia. So Lori, I'll start with you. Could you provide a little background about yourself and how you got interested in studying students with dyslexia and other learning issues?
Sure. So I actually first got interested in dyslexia when I stopped going to college, actually. So I took a year off in between my sophomore and junior year of college, and I worked in an elementary school. And I was a teacher's aide, and I worked with different reading groups. And one of the kids in the reading groups was really struggling to learn how to read, and I became really fascinated by that. And sort of the rest is history, but that was the beginning of it all. And when I look back on it, I think that child was probably the most severe individual with dyslexia that I'd probably ever come across. So it's sort of interesting, but that's what sparked my interest and led me down this path.
Hi, everybody. We're all very glad to be here and have an opportunity to interact with you a little bit today. I'm going to try to answer Joe's question, how I got interested, but it's going to be really a two-part explanation. I'm going to do part, and Lynn's going to do part. We met at Johns Hopkins as undergraduates, and when we were there, there was no Department of Education or anything like that. They didn't train teachers or stuff like that. So I was a psych major, and Lynn was a math major. And Lynn lived, at the time, Hopkins was not very friendly, didn't seem to care a whole lot about its undergraduates. It was much more interested in graduate education. And after your freshman year there, you were kicked off campus. There was no room for you. And so everyone had to find their own way in Baltimore. And Lynn and a couple of her girlfriends found themselves in a high-rise in a low-income, working-class African-American neighborhood. And so they and I would hang out there. And over time, we became very friendly with, familiar to and friendly with the kids in the neighborhood. And at one point, we decided that we would start a Saturday school. And we opened up Lynn's pretty large apartment to about 15, 20 kids. And we also corralled our Hopkins buddies to bring their physics equipment, chemistry tests, various other things to the apartment. And we had this ridiculous-looking sprawl of all kinds of activities, and the kids absolutely loved it. And that was really the genesis of our interest in education. And that summer, we wrote our first proposal to the city of Baltimore. We got money to start a summer school, and it was probably disastrous, but because we didn't really know what we were doing, but we tried. And then we decided to get our teaching certificates and master's degrees in education from the University of Pennsylvania, which we did, and now it's Lynn's turn.
So I'm going to pick up the story when we began our first teaching assignments. And I was teaching first grade, and Doug was teaching fourth grade in the outskirts of Philadelphia. And it was a humbling experience, just like our Saturday school and summer camp were learning experiences. And most notably in first grade, I think I did a pretty good job of teaching reading, even given what we know these days about the science of reading and the importance of a structured phonics approach. And despite that, in my classroom of 25 children, there were 2 kids who were not learning to read the way they should. And I was very curious about them. They were very different from each other. One child sort of had generalized learning difficulty and a lot of associated behavior, but the other child was clearly, very smart, with good background knowledge, and he could learn the decoding skills that I was teaching, but his decoding was extremely laborious. It was so hard for him to break that code that permits people to read words, that he couldn't really listen or understand the words that he was reading. He couldn't understand the text. And that was my first blush with dyslexia. And I was very interested in that. And Doug and I continued on to doctoral programs at the University of Minnesota, and our intention was to ultimately get back to the idea of starting a school. But we never quite turned back in that direction. We continued on with our research programs because we enjoyed that, and we were able to make a contribution that way.
Great, thank you all. So I'll move to the next question. Doug, I'm going to start with you. So could you please highlight for the audience a past or current project that you feel has made a significant contribution to our understanding of dyslexia and the treatment of other learning difficulties?
So, I thought a little bit about this, and I could do this in a number of different ways, but my colleagues and I at Vanderbilt, over the years, have worked really hard on a process for understanding what works with children with very serious learning problems like dyslexia. And the process, I can't, for obvious reasons, I can't dig deep into this. But for those of you who know anything about medical diagnoses, typical general education assessments, it's kind of a deductive process. You're supposed to start with giving kids or young adults or whomever good tests, valid tests, and from those tests you deduce a diagnosis, and the diagnosis in turn is supposed to inform what you do as a practitioner, right? So our process works in the opposite way. It's an inductive process. Now keep in mind, this process, this assessment process was developed specifically for kids for whom there is no off-the-shelf program that's going to work, that's necessarily going to work. You can point to the most strongly validated, evidence-based program, and whereas it will work with a lot of kids, it will not work for all kids, and especially children with serious learning problems. And so you might start with something like Orton-Gillingham and hope that Orton-Gillingham will work for your student, but you start with it prepared to see that the child is not responding adequately, not responding fast enough to get the child to a place where, in terms of skill development, where the child needs to be that augurs well for the future. And so the process that we started to develop at the University of Minnesota and have continued over the years to develop at Vanderbilt is a very, very strong assessment process that can help a skillful teacher. We're not talking, this is not for beginners. This assessment is for skilled practitioners. The process permits the practitioner to understand what is working and what isn't working. And when the instruction that she or he is delivering is not working, then it's up to the instructor to try something different. And you might say, well, how will they know what to do? Well, they're skilled, they're experienced, they have hunches, they have educated guesses. And so they make a change, and the difference between our assessment process and others is that you continue to monitor the child. You don't just do it at the beginning, come up with a diagnosis, and then go, for a treatment. You're continually monitoring the child on assessment tasks that are validated, that are sensitive, very sensitive to children's instructional response. And it's like a pilot in a craft with a really good set of dials versus being in an airplane with very few dials or unreliable dials. And so over time, we've tested this out in various ways and have been able to show that skilled practitioners using this assessment method bring many more children along to points where they need to be than other approaches used by equally skilled practitioners. So I'm going to stop there.
Lynn?
So in my 5 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is to help you understand the kind of innovative research that's being conducted in the Vanderbilt Department of Special Ed by our faculty in the area of dyslexia. But I'm going to focus on a critical but overlooked aspect of schooling for these children, and that is the nature of their math instruction. And I'm going to start with just a bit of background information.
Could you hold your mic a little closer?
Yes, sorry. So some background information on why I'm focusing on math when we're talking about children with dyslexia. So the math achievement potential for children with dyslexia runs the full gamut. Children with strong math abilities require schools to nurture that potential with instructional programs designed to accelerate their math learning. But given the strong day-to-day focus in the school lives of children with dyslexia and their need for intensive reading intervention, many schools don't have the resources to provide the opportunities necessary for these same children to excel and accomplish their math potential. And that clearly needs to change. But at the same time, children with dyslexia have disproportionate risk for co-occurring difficulty in math. they are 2 to 3 times more likely than children without dyslexia to experience dyscalculia and other math disabilities. That's because some of the same neurocognitive processes that underlie dyslexia, like phonological processing, working memory, other executive functions, are the same processes that create risk for math disability. And given the limited time for intervention in the schools, along with the costs of delivering intervention in reading and math, many children with co-occurring reading and math difficulty receive no math intervention. And our faculty in the Department of Special Ed at Vanderbilt have led the field with research designed to deepen understanding about what makes children with dyslexia vulnerable to co-occurring math difficulty. And using that knowledge, we've designed theoretically guided intensive interventions for treating co-occurring reading and math difficulty in coordinated fashion. So right now, our faculty is conducting a large-scale randomized controlled trial funded by the National Institutes for Research, National Institutes of Health, to assess the efficacy of coordinated, dual-focus intervention at first grade. So we're identifying hundreds of children in the local schools with substantial reading and math delays at the start of first grade. And we randomly assigned those children to 3 conditions. Some of them receive reading-only intervention. Some receive math-only intervention. And some receive the coordinated dual-focus reading and math intervention. But importantly, they all receive the same amount of intervention time. And our research team delivers these interventions in the children's schools 3 times a week for 15 weeks, and we evaluate their reading and math performance before and after intervention. And to date, findings suggest that dual-focus reading and math coordinated intervention produces similar reading outcomes as reading-only intervention and similar math outcomes as math-only intervention. And if these results hold up across the full randomized control trial, that would represent a major advance in the treatment of children with dyslexia who also experience co-occurring math difficulty.
Lori?
So my lab studies some of the brain bases of learning difficulties, and we mostly focus on reading. And we study children that are of all ages. We actually have a study from infancy all the way up through 10 years old, a longitudinal study, and part of that will look at how the brain, different aspects of the brain predict different cognitive outcomes, including reading and math. And we also have individuals who are adolescents that we look at and try to understand sort of what goes right and what goes wrong when they are struggling with reading. And we have some intervention studies where we're trying to understand how does the brain change when we deliver interventions that are scientifically sound and those that we know work with individuals with dyslexia. In terms of sort of a current project that I think is most interesting and potentially has something to contribute in terms of our understanding of prediction of dyslexia. We are studying children in kindergarten before they know how to read or when they're very, very beginning reading. And we're imaging their brain, so we're looking at what's going on in their brain, both what does their brain look like structurally, what areas of their brain are they using when they're trying to listen to sounds or look at letters. And we're taking that information and we're trying to figure out, can we use that information to predict later reading and math outcomes, actually. And does that help in predicting those outcomes? Can it add, importantly, can it add anything to what we know already are strong predictors that Doug and Lynn were talking about? And so most recently, we just published a paper where we found that the areas that are involved in executive function and how those coordinate and connect with areas that are important for reading, we found that the strength between the executive function or cognitive control areas and the specific reading area, which is known to be to activate differently in individuals with dyslexia, the degree to which individuals were connecting those two parts of their brain predicted their growth over kindergarten. So they came in sort of being non-readers or very, very early readers, and then those who were stronger readers at the end of kindergarten had this greater connectivity between their executive function area and this area that's involved with reading called the left occipitotemporal lobe. And so I think understanding whether this can add something in terms of predicting dyslexia is something that myself, we're investigating. Other labs are also investigating it. And the idea is there something that we could detect before kids even have to get to the point that they're failing? Is there something that we could detect very, very early on that may then allow for more preventive measures to be put in place earlier on?
Thank you very much, all of you. Just before we move on to the next question, I just want to kind of piggyback on what Lynn mentioned, that these three individuals represent part of the powerhouse that we have in the area of reading and math and learning difficulties. Dr. Jeannie Wanzik, who was supposed to be here but had a family emergency, does work in intensive intervention, and Dr. Marsha Barnes, who's away for family business, does work both in reading and math, and then works with Doug and Lynn and Lori on a number of projects. So it's what you're getting, I think, a picture of is the issue of dyslexia and other associated learning difficulties is not an easy issue, right? And it requires teams. And we're representing the group from the Department of Special Education, but across Peabody we have individuals who are doing related work, and all these folks here work with persons in psychology and human development. We're coordinating people with leadership, policy, and organization to think about policy around dyslexia as well too. So the initiative of the core was here, and the gift from the Roberts family for the Academy and the Center is only going to elevate, I think, this work to the very next level. So we have one more question, so you guys have plenty of time to talk. If not, I'm going to make up a question that will surprise everybody. So they don't want that, I can promise you that. So progress has been made over the last 40 years, right? But there's more progress is needed. So if you had to think about sort of what issues or questions that are really going to be key and important for us to move on and to act on and to understand in the next 5 to 10 years in the field of dyslexia, just feel free to speculate. And Dylan, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I'll mention a few different topics and hopefully won't step on my colleagues' toes here. But I think that the knowledge that's being generated here at Peabody, Vanderbilt, and at other hotspots of work on learning disabilities is really going to change the fields and practitioners' understanding of dyslexia. It has the capacity to do that in the next decade. We're talking about the neurological markers, like Lori was talking about. It's diagnostic subcategories, like we're interested in here at Vanderbilt, like the nature of intensive clinical practice, like Doug was talking about. I think that there will be good advances that we'll see in the next decade. That includes what Lori mentioned. I think earlier diagnosis of dyslexia can permit earlier intervention that will reduce the burden or severity of dyslexia and create easier and more successful pathways for children. I think in the near future, we can expect breakthroughs that expand the framework for dyslexia intervention by focusing on co-occurring difficulties, like I was talking about, not only between dyslexia and math, but also involving attention and anxiety. And I think a third promising direction that we're seeing nice developments in now are methods for improving academic skills and cognitive abilities, looking at both of those domains in an integrated way, so that we can create new strategies for supporting children's transfer from cognitive training to academic performance. And this direction for expanding the framework for dyslexia intervention is grounded in the basic idea that cognitive resources support development of academic competencies, and we've known that for a long time. But what we're beginning to understand better is that academic learning and exercising academic skills can also strengthen cognitive abilities. And so the idea is how to marry those two avenues for potential to expand the learning of children with dyslexia and other learning disorders. And another refreshing development, my last one, guys, is in the movement that we see emerging where children with dyslexia are taking ownership and pride in identifying as individuals with dyslexia. And I think it's possible for intervention to take advantage of that development in innovative ways to improve the lives, long-term success, and psychological well-being of children with dyslexia.
Thank you, Lynn. Lori?
Can I just say what she said? So I think Lynn really covered so much of it and so much more elegantly than I would have been able to. I guess the things that I would add are thinking about when we think about dyslexia, one of the things that's tricky is thinking about what's nature and what's nurture, what's environmentally driven, what's not environmentally driven, and how to sort of tease apart those aspects. So I think one of the things that will be helpful as we move forward is understanding a little bit more about that, particularly brain-wise, because we've always sort of thought about things as like either environment or biology, and really biology and environment interplay with each other so much. So that's sort of one area that I think is an interesting area to be thinking about in the next 5 to 10 years, or important area to be thinking about. Another is that how do we put in place mechanisms and infrastructure to ensure equitable access to the prevention and treatment of dyslexia? So I think that's really a tricky one, and one that the field really needs to tackle and is tackling now, but continue to tackle with probably an even greater emphasis in the next 5 to 10 years.
Is it possible to lower the lights a little bit, because I think we'd really like to see you guys. You can see us, but we can't see you. I think it'll be especially important should you have questions, so we can see who we're talking to. Well, hopefully somebody is doing that. I'll talk about another area that is really, really important, and it's known colloquially as the gap between research and practice. We at Vanderbilt concern ourselves with, our department concerns itself to a considerable extent, thank you, with research. And, you know, virtually all of us do our research work, work very hard at research, not just for the sake of doing research, but having an impact. And if we're honest with ourselves, our impact is often very modest. And why is that the case? Well, it's a multi-determined phenomenon, if you will. I mean, there are many reasons that contribute to the gap between research and practice. Sometimes the research is insufficiently grounded in the realities of practice. Sometimes the research is grounded in practice, but practitioners, for whatever reason, are not interested in it. They're distracted, they have other concerns and priorities, and they don't see the importance of it the way that we do. Yet another reason for the gap between research and practice is that many schools, I'm tempted to say most schools, especially most, not all, but most public schools, don't have the resources to do what we do in our research. Our research oftentimes is funded by you, by the federal government. And so we can bring to bear resources in the persons of graduate students and various other ways that schools themselves would have a hard time matching. And so we can accomplish things with greater staff and resources that many schools can't. And so, and this aspect of resources is tremendously exacerbated right now, and many of you know this, by a situation whereby lots of public schools are essentially being disfunded, or defunded, I should say. They're not getting the resources from their state governments that they need to come close to matching the needs of the students in the schools. So this has really important implications for all kids, but especially for kids with severe learning problems, like children and youth with dyslexia. Why? Because children and youth with dyslexia, and I know this as I know my own name, are going to succeed only if they have the intensity, the expertise, and the intensity of instruction that they need. They're capable of responding, but they need intensive intervention. Intensive intervention is costly. It's a resource issue. And this is where I want to go. And some of you may not particularly warm to the suggestion, but I'm telling you the truth as I know it. There is a strong push in the dyslexia community to have all children in general classrooms all the time, or most of the time. There is a belief held by some more strongly than others that that's the rightful and legitimate place for all children, period, and children with dyslexia. The problem with that assumption and belief is that many, many general classrooms do not have the resources. The response oftentimes is, well, we will try very hard to prepare the general classroom teacher to become much more knowledgeable about what our children need. That's wonderful. That's important, but it's not sufficient. Lots of kids with dyslexia and other severe learning problems need very intensive expert instruction. And if they don't get it, they're not going to reach their potential. So my gratuitous advice is to be careful about the demand, expectation that all children spend all of their instructional time in general education without really understanding whether, if kids are going to get the instruction they need there. That's it.
Thank you all very much for those remarks and a brief snapshot of what's going on here at Vanderbilt and around the field of dyslexia. So thank the panelists. So we do have a few moments for questions from the audience. If you want to ask questions, I would suggest raising your hand, and we'll try to see the lights. Yes, sir.
It's obvious from what you all have said that you're doing great work in the area of diagnosis and remediation. Based on the title of the panel discussion, I was anticipating that there is some power, some advantage that dyslexics have over non-dyslexics. Anecdotally, that we've all heard of dyslexics maybe being more creative. I'm just wondering if dyslexics do have a unique advantage or power, and if so, how you unlock that, how you promote it.
Lynn, I think your work well suits you to answer that.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question surrounded that there is information or comment around the persons with dyslexia may have abilities that allow them to excel in other areas. And the question is if that's the case, and if so, how do we unlock that potential?
Let me just, before you answer, let me just say that I'm going to give you a really quick response, a quick answer. I mean, I'm not aware of any serious study that comes up with that conclusion, but I kind of understand, I do understand where your question and others who may feel similarly, where that comes from. There are incredibly well-documented, celebrated artists, scientists, adventurers throughout history who have had documented dyslexia. And I'm thinking of Einstein as an example. Did not learn to read until he was much older than typical time when kids learn to read. So I kind of get a sense of where that curiosity comes from. I personally am not aware of what I'll say is credible studies that that show that, but I'm interested in what these guys have to say.
Well, I agree with Doug about the research literature, and at least my knowledge of it. But I think that the point that you raise is important when you're thinking about a school experience for children with dyslexia, like what the three of us and our colleagues, Marcia and Jeannie, are in the throes of spending a lot of time on. How we'll design the Roberts Academy experience to address these children's multifaceted needs and talents. And I think that as in any school environment, we need to be able to nurture not only the fundamental skills, but also the creative potential of children. And I think that the school will do a good job of nurturing that potential. And I think that as you raise a very good question, is a context not only for providing opportunity, but also for studying the very question that you raise.
It's a question that can be studied. So, I mean, off the top of my head, if I were to get involved in such a study, one of the things I would want to know is are children with a dyslexia label disproportionately likely to show evidence of creativity and whatever other attribute you might be interested in. And I am not familiar with any literature that speaks to that. That doesn't mean it's not true, right? I'm just saying we don't have I don't think we have the scientific evidence.
So I agree totally with what Doug and Lynn said, that, I don't think there have been, really broad systematic studies trying to tackle this. So it makes the question a little bit difficult to answer, although there's a lot of examples out around the world that as Doug talked about. And I think it really merits a more systematic study. One of the tricky things about studying it is that the federal government often doesn't like to fund things about, things that are ostensibly not a problem, right? There's like a gift, and then how do you study that? How do you get money for that? Because they usually want to know about things that are really problematic. So I think that might be one of the reasons why it's been less systematically studied. I will say that there's one study that I am aware of that's sort of an interesting one. It's a very preliminary study, and certainly not a big, huge literature like it. But it's an interesting study by one of our colleagues, Ken Pugh, actually. And he did a study where he showed that individuals with dyslexia seem to sort of have this, it's a neuroimaging study, it's a brain study. So there seems to be this trade-off where individuals with dyslexia tend to use less of the areas associated with reading when they're reading, but when they're doing object, visual perception, manipulation tasks, visual tasks essentially, that they're using more parts of their brain that individuals without dyslexia are using for reading. So, but it's one study out there, and I think it does need to be systematically studied. But I think a big reason for that has been sort of the resources and energy to be able to conduct a study like that, which hopefully we'll be able to be able to do and start to think about as part of the school and the Roberts Academy.
Well, and there's also, all of us are familiar with the Learning Lab in Washington, D.C., which is a private school that really is oriented strongly in the direction of nurturing talent among children with learning disabilities. And that's an interesting resource for us as we, in our planning for the Roberts Academy.
Yeah, we should have other people ask questions, but Lynn brings up the Learning Lab. Google it sometime if you're interested. The Learning Lab in Washington, D.C. was founded maybe 50 years ago, I'm guessing, by a very unique woman named Sally Smith. And I visited the lab on a couple of occasions in Washington, and it was a school like no other. I mean, everything was art. Everything was taught through art, and you were like in a crazy art gallery when you walked into that school. And Sally Smith, by the way, always would paint her fingernails. I'm not usually observant about these sorts of things, but I couldn't help but notice every fingernail was a different color on every single day of her life.
She was a character.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any ongoing research or knowledge based on helping adults or senior adults who have dyslexia?
So the question is there any ongoing efforts or research in the area of older adults with dyslexia?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any systematic programmatic work, which is really a deficit in our knowledge and understanding. I think there have been attempts to teach adults who can't read to provide services and understand the best routes for teaching adults who can't read to read. But I don't think it's ever been framed through the lens of dyslexia. So I think that we know some methods for teaching adults to read, but we don't understand how that relates to dyslexia.
So I think I'm not aware of a whole lot of adult studies happening now, but about a decade ago, there was some adult studies where people were trying to look at adult literacy programs and implement some of the systematic work. One of the things from that work which really struck me that my colleagues would talk about is that the complexity of somebody who reaches adulthood who can't read very well, there's a whole lot of other things that are going on with that person, whether that's been caused by the lack of ability to read, but there's, a lot of self-esteem issues, a lot of other issues like that. And so one of the things, for example, that I remember my colleague talking about was that it was really, really tough to do research because the individuals wanted to come to the literacy centers and get the intervention, but the kind of jobs they had made it very difficult for them to be able to get transportation there. If they missed work, then it was really an issue in terms of their livelihood and things like that. So I think it's a really complicated area to study, but an important one.
Your comment raises, I think, another point. If you'll remember Lynn talking about one of her first graders when Lynn was in her first year of teaching, a boy named Paul was a smart kid and had very good listening comprehension, but really had tremendous difficulty reading at the word level, and as a consequence, had a lot of difficulty with reading comprehension. And so we oftentimes think of dyslexia, I think, a little bit too narrowly in terms of this serious difficulty reading at the word level without giving sufficient consideration to possible implications for reading comprehension. So a lot of the kids will show serious reading comprehension deficits secondary to their difficulty reading at the word level.
Yes, ma'am, over here.
So kind of piggybacking on the first question, are there any studies that show whether or not intelligence is, like dyslexia and intelligence are normally distributed? In other words, are you more likely to have children who are twice exceptional or not? What's the comment? Because I was thinking about what you were just saying, and working memory is one of the big issues, I think, also in terms of reading comprehension, is they don't have the working memory. By the time they decode it, they can't get to the next word, and so they can't make it make sense because they're so busy decoding each piece of it. They don't have enough working memory to make that happen. And so I'm wondering how intelligence plays into that as well, because it seems like my son goes to a school that is purely for dyslexics, Ross and Saunders in Austin, Texas. I don't know if you know it, but it's been eye-opening to kind of see how the multisensory approach has made such a big difference, because we struggled for 4 years in elementary school and public schools, and it was a big difference.
I'm going to shorten your question to the connection between intelligence and dyslexia, intelligence distribution and dyslexia.
Yeah, so I think that, definitionally and through identification, of course, there's, we seek to identify, when we're identifying children for our studies, and when schools and clinicians are diagnosing dyslexia and dyscalculia, the assumption is that children have intelligence within the normal range. Now, that spans, the normal range has a large span, and I think that we find dyslexia throughout that distribution. We're not talking about the tail of intelligence, but I don't. We need more research focusing on the intersection of intelligence and reading, but I think that the idea is, and probably the more driving force, is not intelligence as a construct so much, but the subdomains that really drive intelligence, like language comprehension, and, as you say, working memory, and trying to figure out how to harness potential where it exists and build capacity where it doesn't.
So when you're talking about the distribution of intelligence in a dyslexia population, I think that if you look at schools, if you look at children with the label in schools, you will find a noticeable shift upwards in intelligence in comparison to the school population generally, in part because what you're doing in the process of diagnosing dyslexia is deliberately excluding a lot of kids with lower tested IQs. So I think it's partly a function of that. I will also say to you that the role of IQ, the role of intelligence in a disorder like dyslexia or learning disabilities is in academia, not in your daily lives necessarily, but in academia, a very hot issue. Intelligence is viewed very skeptically, not by us, but by a lot of academics. And they have tried, some of them have tried very hard to remove intelligence from serious discussions of disorders like dyslexia, partly because of their view that it is tainted by dominant society bias. So it's an interesting situation.
Want to say anything?
I don't think I have anything to add, actually.
Okay, so I think we're about at time. So, was there one more question way up there? We'll be around to answer questions. If you want to shout out your question real quickly, then. How much time do we have? One more, yes. Okay.
You had talked a bit about intensive instruction, so I was wondering if you could elaborate on what intensive instruction looks like for a clean dyslexic, one without the emotional and behavioral issues when it's overlooked for quite some time and not diagnosed until, say, middle school or high school. Like, what does that intensive instruction look like later versus at the early ages?
So the question is the issues about intensive intervention and how it might look differently for a young child versus someone who might be experiencing some failure during school and maybe upper elementary or middle school. Is that
Yeah,
right?
focusing more on the older age, like what tools are available when you're no longer teaching, basic reading and phonics.
Well, I think that one of the findings about adolescents who continue to struggle with the code, so foundational decoding skills, is surprisingly that we can still teach them to read using the validated approaches when they're implemented on an intensive basis while adjusting instruction, like Doug was talking about, in a data-based way. I'll also say that with technology providing a context for us where access to text is not as exclusively driven by actual reading, I think that we can go a long ways toward supporting competent, successful lives. That potential has not really been studied adequately, how to rely on tools. I'm thinking particularly of one child who went through the Vanderbilt Reading Clinic years ago and did learn to read, but in a very effortful way that degraded his comprehension to a certain extent. That kid has grown into a highly successful adult who relies strongly on technology to make sure that his communications with people look like they are intelligently constructed and accurately spelled, and help him deal with messaging, in an adequate way, help him develop contracts for his business partners. And I think, well, I know that when you ask him whether he thinks he can actually read, and this is despite the best intervention you can imagine, he would say not really. So, I think that there are some individuals who require instruction on how to live with their disability in a productive way.
Okay, I think we're done for questions. So this is an example of why I love my job and excited about coming to work. I know there are several other questions up there, but I just want to take a moment to thank the panelists and also to thank you for attending and to understand why we're so excited about the gift from the Roberts family. The Academy and the Center is only going to take in the work that's being done here, and I think the future looks very bright thanks to their gift, and want to publicly thank them again for their generosity and thank this panelist for their comments. So thank you very much. If you have questions, you can feel free to come down. The panelists will stay around to answer any questions you might have.